Welcome to Simply Sheppy, your community podcast which aims to create and enhance connections within the community to build a better Sheppy. Welcome to our Simply Sheppy podcast, where this episode I'm joined by Amanda Peddle. Amanda is here to talk to us about Inside Out outreach services for young people in the TAMS journey. Thank you for joining me today, Amanda.
Hello, thank you for having me.
That's okay. I didn't give you much of an introduction there, did I? So if to start off with, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
So it's a real mixture of things. I'm a practitioner. I work one-to-one and with families around emotional responses and the impact that can cause. I've written the TAMS Journey book, so I'm an author, and I do some consultancy work within health and education. And mainly I'm just someone on a journey myself. I'm a research student now, and I've got a 6-year study plan, which is a bit daunting, but it's all around best practice around delivering social and emotional learning within education, and I sort of flip between all of those hats really. And I was raised on the island, born and bred on the island. I went to local schools, and just got this overriding passion for our young people to be able to tap into what skills make them, and focus on their positives, but understanding how they can manage that and what their brain and bodies are doing.
Okay, so all of these little projects that you do, you must be an incredibly busy lady. So thank you so much for joining me today. All of these projects, they're all focused around this idea of understanding the impact of emotional response in young people and supporting them in forming relationships and positive engagement. So if we take one of the projects to start with and talk a little bit about that one more, the Inside Out outreach services for young people, that's what I saw on your Facebook page. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I spent 10-12 years working in schools on the island, and I started out as a teaching assistant because I wanted the school holidays, quite honestly, and I quite quickly became fascinated with the young people who were considered to be challenging, and didn't have very positive relationships with the adults in the schools, and I found it quite easy to form relationships with those children, and then over time I progressed to being a pastoral manager and a head of year at Westminster College then. And I started studying, and I did a counselling qualification, and then I started a foundation degree in supporting young people, and then went on to do the degree. And the more I did, the more frustrated I got at this huge raft of children that slip through the net. That they don't fit the criteria for lots of services, and they don't engage in the ones that were offered because they see them as very outside of their area, outside of their comfort zone. So maybe they wouldn't see a counsellor, or they wouldn't go to CAMS, or they wouldn't work with those workers, but the family maybe didn't fall into that category to get that help. And there was all these kids I was working with, and there just wasn't anything for them. And when we were Minster College, we had a whole load of things, and we went through this period of there not being a lot at this transition between the school systems. They have a lot more now, by the way. So I went self-employed. I left actually and went to work for Children's Residential Services, and went self-employed as an independent practitioner, so that I could do the work that needed doing without having to be contained by a system that would alienate my kids locally, and then just start to work with them. I've got a real issue about the shame and the stigma that children have when they respond emotionally, and the way as a society we have responded back to that, and there needs to be a shift.
Where do you think that shame comes from? Where do you think that stigma comes from?
It goes right back. I mean, if you look at the word mental, we use this phrase mental health. If you look at the word mental, if you go back 30, 40, 50 years, the connotations of that word are very, very negative. There were mental homes, mental institutions, you're mental. At the end of in the world wars, people with shell shock, were shot for treason. So it's still quite a negative mindset in some areas. Not everybody is able to have a mental health conversation without feeling like there is a negative stigma attached to that, like it's a bad thing, like they've done something wrong. And that really sealed it for me when I was doing some work with a young person, and we were working on the Tams Journey project, which is a part of that. And it's neuroeducation based, so it teaches them the science of what's going on in the brain and the body. And this was a child who had refused lots and lots of support in the past, but in having a conversation after building a relationship with him about what was going on in his body, the phrase he used was, "Who knew you could talk about feelings without getting the ump?" So it's that fear of exposure and the unknown of what they're going into, and the distrust of those systems. And some areas, some demographics mean that we've got more of that in some areas than others. In some places in the world, they would access that easily, and other young people are going to find that more difficult. So it was about building relationships and working with these young people to get them to a point where they felt okay to access those services and take that next step onwards. And then we could get them into the right service, or get them into a service that they ordinarily wouldn't engage with. Even if it meant just building a relationship up with a member of staff at the school. It doesn't have to be some massive intervention. It's just about, sometimes they've never built a positive relationship with a professional. And sometimes if that professional is someone based in a school or based in a clinic, that is what puts them off. So someone outside of that, where they can meet on their own terms, they have some power in how the meetings happen, what the conversation is, that then, enables them to invest in building a relationship. And then you can have some conversations which enable them to move on to things that are going to, support that growth more.
So it's like an interim service almost,
It can
but an
be.
incredibly important one.
Yeah, I mean, the idea was that the service is whatever it is needed to be. So I do a wide range of work, primarily when schools are not able to engage. And that might be behavioural, that might be medical, that might be mental health, that might be a big family issue. So the work might be with one child, it might be with the whole family around the dinner table. And it might be over in Starbucks while you're having a cup of coffee and a chat. It might be sat at the seafront. It's about coming out of that formal environment, which for them, for whatever reason, is the barrier. It's seeing people as professionals. It's seeing something as formal, and it's just taking it on another footing. And youth work, in some senses, is similar. But that's different again. This sits between health and education, and tries to navigate and support a family or an individual to access the support that is there, and trust in it. But if they've never trusted anybody, and our kids locally are, there are lots of young people in lots of areas, but certainly in Swale and in Thanet, there is a lot of nervousness and mistrust around authorities and authority figures and services, and I think parents are also very mistrustful of the mental health services for children because of the long waiting lists. And this is no sort of negative reflection on the services. There's a lot of people working very, very hard to support children. But it's like everything, it's the funding, it's the structures, it creates a barrier for some families.
And that's unfortunate. But you mentioned about the Tams Journey. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, so I started out really with the much older children, so sort of year nines, tens, and 11s. And it was, when I first started, it was much more around behaviours, really challenging behaviours in school that cause barriers to access in school and lots of exclusions. Interestingly enough, the work has shifted, and some of that's due to the pandemic, and I think some of it's due to other factors. But we're looking at the behaviours are more avoidant nowadays rather than outwardly aggressive. There is still a mix of the two, but it's you've got lots of kids that struggle to access school now. And so my service, over the last sort of 12 years, my age range has got younger and younger and younger, and obviously I've learnt more, I've studied more, the range has got wider. And I have a primary program, which became quite a structured little program and quite a set routine, and it was quite, the kids liked it. And I spent about a year wandering around telling the whole world I was going to write a book. Oh, I'm going to write a book about it. I'm going to write a book about it. And actually, some of the kids challenged me in a session once, and they said, "You keep saying that you're going to write a book about it, and you teach us all this great stuff about challenging yourself, but you haven't done it. So why haven't you done it?" And to hear my work being quoted back to me from year fives was a bit like, all right, okay, all right, okay. So I took myself off and started putting some notes down, and over time the program developed, and now we've got a really structured 4-week program. It's an introductory program, it's a very early intervention, and it's an explainer module. So what it does is it explains to children the whys of mental health, who we are. It's an identity module. Why we respond the way we do. So we look at the origins of the response system, the where, which is where it shows up in our body, and the how, which is what then we can do about it. And so the third 3 sections all have an accompanying children's book, which is the Tam's Journey books. So this is the first one, which you can't see on the podcast, but I am holding up a book.
They'll be able to see it on YouTube.
Yeah. So this book, this explains the journey. So the child is called Tam, and he takes himself off to the woods because he's got the ump. And he meets a sloth called Hetty, and she explains how the senses communicate with the brain and how the emergency response system works. And that takes some of that shame out of the initial response, because that understanding is, oh, hang on a minute, that's sort of okay, And then the middle continues the journey. So he pops back and they recap a little bit, and then they look at how the heart and the lungs and the stomach make changes in the body because of the blood and the oxygen levels, and then we get a whole load of physical responses. And again, it's reassuring Tam that these feelings and these emotions and the responses are all natural biological processes within the body. And then the third book, which is out in May, that explains how the neurons and the neurotransmitters in the brain can be soothed by using a sense in a positive way. So we have lots of work that goes out to children about mindfulness and fitness and creativity and art and dance and expression and all of these things, but this really explains why those things work.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I think it can sometimes be quite a hard sell to young people to engage in not all young people. I'm saying some young people, it can be quite a hard sell for them to engage in something creative, especially if they're worried about getting it wrong, or there's no right or wrong in creative activities and dance and things, is there? And it's about expression, but the way that it's taught, sometimes it can seem like there's a right or wrong in dance, or they can focus too much on technique, or with art they can focus too much on technique rather than the expression, and it can make them put some barriers up for them, or they can if you don't start young enough with them, they cannot understand the idea of mindfulness. So I think It's really important to get their buy-in and to make them understand why they're doing it. And that is a really colourful, exciting book. I kind of wish I had it when I was little, because as an adult you learn about fight, flight, don't you? And you learn about the what some adults do, some adults probably still don't, to be fair, and don't understand how their anxiety, how their body responds when they're anxious, and why they get butterflies in their stomach and things like that. What age groups is the TAMS journey aimed at?
Well, it was initially designed as a year 5 project, because the government suggested that every year 6 has access to things, but I know from working in a school that year 6 is crammed full of SATs and transition work and all of that. So I always felt, no, this needs to happen in year 5, end of year 4, beginning of year 5, round about age 10. Cognitive language development is at quite a good point to have these conversations. So that's where it's aimed at. But really, and I mean, the lady that's writing the foreword for the next book is Dr. Tina Ray, and she reads the book to her mum, who's in her 90s, and she loves them. And my nan said that she wished she'd read them. So I do know that whole families read them. The idea was that I can create a resource that reaches homes. So we have a resource in school that is being read at home and is easy to access. So teachers can understand it, parents can understand it, practitioners can understand it. So we're all having the same conversation rather than an intervention at school that is not understood at home.
Okay, and this book is going to be available for parents as well as in schools. So it's going to be sold publicly.
Yeah, the first 2 books have been out. So the first book's been out over a year and is on Amazon and Waterstones. The second book is on Amazon and Waterstones, and the third book, it will also be on Amazon and Waterstones. And then because we've now got a set of 3, we are in talks with a few people. We might have something exciting later on in the year. But this is going to be a set. And we're also now delivering the training program that goes with the 3 books. Our virtual schools have paid for their second year. They've bought into us training their staff. So with the training of the staff, we make the staff that are going to be delivering programs do the whole program, because I don't believe that unless you have the lived experience of having the conversations that go with the program, you don't then get to have the right to deliver that. You need to have had that experience so you know where the children are coming from. And that's been really interesting, because that's been uncomfortable for some of the adults, actually, because there were adults in the conference last year that hadn't ever answered any of these questions and hadn't had that conversation, and the feedback was outstanding. I was really pleased with the feedback from my peers, because what they were saying was that actually having to go through it and understand that we are asking children these questions all the time as part of their social emotional learning, and they're uncomfortable, and you need to feel how uncomfortable that is to do that well. If you're not prepared to push and challenge yourself around those subjects that you are asking children to do, then that's, and I mean, my dream would be that these types of things are standard part of teacher training. I don't expect teachers to do everything, but I do think we're missing a trick in terms of school being a very effective place, because when you talk about relationships, the teachers have the relationships, the school staff, the cleaners, the cooks, the gardeners. There's always a kid that wanders around with the gardener or wants to talk to the cook. It's about every adult. And in Ireland, they have this one adult, this one person program, which really looks at the value that one person can make on a child's life, irrelevant of what their status is.
That's very interesting. So
I really like that idea. It's they did a lot of research over there on it, and it was effective. So it's so I like that idea as well. But now I'm waffling.
That's okay. So sort of what, but we're talking about the TAMS journey, about how parents can support their mental health of their young children and their growing children. What other things can parents do to ensure that they support their children?
I mean, I think generally it's my biggest advice to parents would be to educate yourselves around the emotional responses and be okay with them. There's an awful lot of pressure on social media and in society to do things a certain way, to be a certain way, even to be kind. And no one's kind 100% all the time. We are human. And human behaviour and human responses, there are elements of that that haven't changed for millions of years, and for very good reason, because they're safety responses. And it creates negative bias and it creates behaviours, and it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of pain to truly be comfortable with yourself and the bits that don't work particularly well, and be a little bit okay with that. And I think what's really important is that the conversations you are having with your children is that you are okay with a wide range of emotions. And even before they get to a stage where they have to learn names for these feelings, then there's a conversation. So as much as I designed the book for year fives, I've got early years practices using it with the kids, and they just use the pictures. And we've got these plushy things. We've got a heart and a lung and a tummy and a neuron and a brain. You know, they use the visuals. So they just use the pictures and they use the visuals, and they break down that conversation to much, much earlier. You know, and I think we're coming away from telling children off for having an emotional response. And it's recognizing that your child's emotional response gives you an emotional response. If you
Yeah.
know what that is and you recognize, oh, hang on, they're just setting me off.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my role here is to go, do you know what? Mum's crossed. She's just going to go and have 5 minutes. Or let's have we're both crossed. Let's have a cuddle. You know, we're both crossed. Let's do some colouring and let's do something positive. Let's use the senses, not to react, but to do something productive. And you can still be in a bad mood. This idea that you can spend 24/7, you know, in a calming, meditative state where nothing ever goes wrong and you never feel, is just not a reality. You know, if you wake up in a bad mood, allow yourself some time to sit in that bad mood and explore what's happening, so that you know that you can react differently. You can choose some of your reactions sometimes. So I think sometimes the worst thing we can do is try and put a brave face on. And I do, there are, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there, be happy and train yourself to be happy. And yes, there is a lot of truth in that, you know, but scientifically, that's not possible all of the time. You know, our body, our chemicals and our hormones, they do a job that they're designed to do. And I think to fight it creates another level of stress that just makes it harder to rein stuff back in. Be okay with feeling, but learn to recognize what it is and the impact that it's having.
I
So
think
rather than
that's
beat yourself up, just have a bit of exploration of that.
I think that's a huge journey for an awful lot of adults, though. I mean, if we think about how, you know, I mean, I have two stepsons, 1 4, 1 9, and we're trying to do something similar with them, um, moderately successfully. You know, we're just trying. But then you think, you know, with how sort of my generation was brought up and how their generation has been brought up, you know, the skill set is not necessarily there in all the adults at the moment in order to do that. And it's not just a skill set, I think it's also a mindset. You know, what's the point? Well, I grew up and I didn't talk about my feelings and I'm fine, so why should my kids have to? You know,
Yeah.
they should behave and they should do as they're told. I think it's less. I do think there's a definitely a shift, but I'm hoping I think we can hope that the next generation of children that come through will be far more aware of their feelings and their, and you know, and gets me a little bit angry about this idea of snowflakes and you know, and we call the next generations woke and snowflakes, and we can be horrible about them. And you think, well, actually, you know, they're quite self-aware, they stick up for themselves, they draw boundaries, you know, actually that's really healthy, and that's like a really good thing, and we're criticizing them for it. You know, like, you know, they don't put up with rubbish from their employers, and we used to. Yeah. Is this not a good thing? So I think, you know, hopefully, you know, I mean, it takes a bit. takes a village with children, doesn't it? So hopefully if they can't have it, the support in the schools, maybe their parents are okay, and if their parents don't have the skill set, maybe they can get it from their schools.
Yeah.
Until we can sort of get it more embedded in everybody, this idea that, you know, crying because, you know, you haven't got the right cup for your water, it's okay, we'll deal with it, you know, you don't get so it's, but then parents don't always have the time either, do they? And neither teachers.
No, 100%. And, you know, we live in a very pressurised world, a very pressurised environment. And myself and all my peers, so I work with a huge network of other professionals, and we all are, you know, we all connect, we all collaborate, and we're all very, very clear that our work, as passionate as we are and as desperate as we are for this to happen, this work we will not see big changes in this work in my working lifetime. What we are doing is laying the foundations for the next generation. And I've got 2 ex-students. One's doing paramedic science at uni, one's doing clinical psychology training. They are the ones that are going to make a difference, because they message me and they go, oh my God, we did fight and flight in our training today and I smashed it because we already knew this, you know, and they are now starting to see. So that generation that have had this impact, and we are going to have the phase where we're going to have better educated children around emotional response than the parents. So you're going to have teachers and professionals and children that will understand stuff that's not maybe reaching home. You know, and that's an evolutionary phase. That's how things grow and that's how they develop, and you can't force them and you can't push them. They take time. People need time to process these things, and I think that's where, you know, people's emotions and mental health have been so affected in the pandemic, because we haven't had time to process anything, because there's change upon change upon change, so we're constantly in a state of response.
Well, I mean, that's another huge question, and I'm wondering if we don't need another entire podcast just to talk about mental health and the coronavirus, because that was going to be one of my questions, and I'm realizing this is going to be a massive topic. In terms of, you know, how has the coronavirus impacted the mental health of young people? And I've seen it with the 4-year-old, maybe not so much, but with the 9-year-old certainly has been affected by the isolation of the lockdown, the disruption in his schooling. He's at school, he's not at school, he's at school, he's not at school, he doesn't know which way he's turning. You know, then he's at school and there's only 12 people there, and he's at school and there's 30 people there. Suddenly he's at home. It's very, very difficult. He can't go and see his friends. You know, he hasn't got that outlet anymore. All his after school activities have been cancelled. Soft play that they love, you know, is one of their favorite things in the world. They can't do it anymore. Trampolining. You know, and you can see that over time, you know, it's had an impact. It's had an impact on his emotional well-being, and it's difficult to sort of know what to do, because you don't want to be their only friend in the world, but
you are.
Yeah, you know, at times you're the only person they see all day. You're like, yeah, well, I don't want you to be the only person I see all day either, but we're in this situation, and what can we do, you know?
Yeah, it is very difficult. And I mean, and that is a whole nother piece. But I mean, you know, a lot of it is down to the fact that you have this, you know, when somebody dies and we lose someone, you have a grief cycle. There's a whole change management cycle that runs alongside that, and it uses the same model. When we go into a change, we experience a lot of the similarities, the loss, the grieving process. We're just grieving for things that are still here but are different. They are lost to us. They're not necessarily lost to the world, you know, like when someone dies, but they're lost to us. And when we experience change, there's a process we're supposed to go through to help us emotionally navigate that change, and that can take time. And the problem with this situation, we've had change upon change upon change. So at no point have we ever processed a whole change reaction cycle. We've just gone into another one and another one and another one. And it was easier at the beginning because our responses, our fight and flight response, created extra adrenaline. We had extra hormones. We were either baking cakes or hiding under the couch. You know, everybody was doing something. I was doing YouTube clips and being busy in the office. You know, other people, my daughter was hidden in her bedroom on her gaming and quite happy to hide there. And that's what we do. That's how we respond. as time goes on, this is not a new thing. So we don't have the extra push, we don't have the extra adrenaline. And this is when people start to get quite low and, quite fatigued, because they're trying to process change without the extra chemicals and hormones, and then it just all becomes a bit of a drag. And then that's when people can get mean, they can get very low, the whole be kind things goes out of the window. I mean, the trolling stuff over social media, people have not got any outlet for that. So, it turns into something else. Mine turns into work stuff, obsessing over a box set. We all have a thing, but it's trying to choose some things as well. And it's just not easy. And, it's going to create generational shifts that with impacts for, the way we evolve in the future. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think we're anywhere near understanding what that is. We've got a lot of theory about what might happen. And until we go down the line and we evolve, that will play out.
It might be quite interesting to see. I think there's some hope, isn't there, that there'll be some positive change after the pandemic.
I do hope so. I think for me, the focus on the jobs that have in the past been a little bit demeaned and diminished by people. We've had this celebrity status and this celebrity idealism for such a long time. I quite like the idea that the bin men are our heroes, and the shop workers, the retailers, the people who run the gyms, anybody that works in healthcare. I feel a little bit sad that education, I don't think they've sort of really been elevated to that status at the same. I think there's quite a lot of people still critical of schools and education, which is a shame, because unless schools, I mean, most of these schools have had an awful lot of children still in. They haven't been closed by any measure, and they're exposing themselves all the time. And that's the data teams, that's the ladies on reception, that's the cleaners, that's the people that have got to do the food. That's not, and the teaching assistants, that's everybody, pastoral staff, safeguarding leads, Senkos. I mean, I could go on all day for the amount of people that work in a school. And they're like Michael McKnight, who's a guy I follow. He explains schools are a living system. They all have their parts and they all make that work. And it's all based on those relationships that sort of interlock. They're like societies within themselves. And, so I think, the fact that we are starting to recognise the importance of the very vital roles that are played out in our communities, rather than hanging everything on the celebrity status, I think that is a positive, and I hope it continues. I'm cautious. People tend to revert back to what is comfortable,
especially after trauma.
So I'm hopeful that there can be some conversations about that, but we just don't know. Lots of people will have theories, and we don't know. I'd like to see that carry on, certainly to give our kids some pride in picking a trade, being a tradesman, being a caterer. My first career was in catering, and it was always, if you live in France, that's a really high profile job to have.
But in England, it's denigrated.
In England, it's a bit like, oh, you're a waitress.
Yeah. We can be quite classist in England at times, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a shame, because when you're brought up on the island, I mean, you do grow up with a chip on your shoulder. I mean, coming from the Isle of Sheppey and going to the comp, you were almost made to be apologetic every time you told anybody where you came from and that you went there. And it's and I think kids still have some of that stigma.
That's a shame. And the next, because this podcast is simply Sheppey, so we're going to focus a little bit about Sheppey now. And you just said about the stigma of living on Sheppey and being born on Sheppey, and that's something that I've heard quite a lot. Yeah. And I've also heard about the web feet and things like that. So. So let's go positive first, and let's ask you what your favourite thing is about the Isle of Sheppey.
I think the diversity. I think people just don't realise, Queenborough's like a fishing town. Laysdown is like this wonderful retro seaside town. You've got the bird sanctuaries and Harty and Elmley, and they're beautiful. You've got Sheerness, it's sort of that post-industrial, just, there's people trying all the time to make these places better. You've got the sea all around. I just think it's, there's a lot of undiscovered benefits, not just the fancy shepherd's huts that are in the papers, because they are wonderful. They do give a nice reflection. And and it's the work, things like Sheppey Matters, the Curly's Farm, the stuff that Oasis do within the community, the food banks, the radio programs, our local radio shows. There is a lot of positivity, and there's a really lovely sense of community, and they all bring their barriers. They all bring their barriers. I think we could work together better. And I think, and I still think, I always say, if you come from Sheppey, you're born a little bit oppositional and a little bit defiant. There always feels like a bit of an edge, that we want to stand up for things, and it can come across a bit sometimes defensive, and I feel that and I see that. But I think when it's channeled positively, then that is fantastic. And I just think there's just so much to do and see. We didn't move far at all last year. I spent time in the sea. I went for walks around, walked to shops, and
discovered the joys of Sheppey, which are, let's face it, many.
Yeah, we went up Curly's
maybe
Farm twice just to stand and look at the animals. I had no small children to take. I just took myself and my daughter, who's 26, because it was just joyful to be outside and be with animals, and it's affordable. And then, sit at the beach, collect some shells, find some sea glass. There is a lot of good stuff out there, but you've got to find your own positives in where you live, I think. And I think, having lived in other places and coming back, choosing to come back and live here in my 30s, when I was 30, that gives me a different outlook, because certainly when I lived here as a teenager, I couldn't tell you anything nice about the place. Couldn't wait to get away. So I think to come back and look at it from a wider view, then you see the positives. You don't always see them when you haven't got a comparison.
Again, I think that's another story that I've heard before about people who've lived here when they were younger, and of course they were looking for different things from the town, and that brings me on to my next question. We were talking about the well-being of young people. Is there anything that needs to happen on the Isle of Sheppey beyond what's already happening to ensure the well-being of the young people on the Isle of Sheppey?
Well, it's very difficult. Swale has always been underfunded, and on Sheppey we probably don't get the cut of what Swale gets. It's most professionals I work with that work off the island have always said that the island is a very difficult place to work on, because they struggle to get access. They struggle to get access to people and organisations and through the schools. And it is this, I do find that there is this element of the kids don't always want to engage with someone that doesn't live here.
Okay.
But this is where schools are really important. There was a study out recently about the increase in schools mental health in children, and there were a huge amount of statistics, but there was one statistic they didn't explore, and was that 62% of children chose not to access CAMS, and the same amount of children chose not to access an outside service, but they'd all access something in school. But nobody then looked at what that 62% was offered in school, because schools actually provide outstanding support within the school when it comes to children's emotional well-being, and there's certainly not enough conversations between the health and schools about what works in the schools. We have round upon round upon round of programs offered. Actually, sometimes that's already happening.
So there needs to be far more communication.
Definitely communication and collaboration, between services. But it's not easy. It isn't easy, because you're coming from different frameworks, and when you put key performance indicators onto programs, The school needs to work to theirs, health needs to work to theirs, community organisation needs to work to theirs. And because it all comes back to money, if you're not ticking the same boxes, there is no benefit to working across, which is why I work for myself, because I don't have to prove a benefit to anybody. I can go and work across those. But the research I'm doing is looking into that to see if there's areas where we can create some cohesion and some communication at those intersections, something that can work and bring these things together, because I can do it as an independent practitioner because I'm not answerable to a funder.
Okay, so it gives you a lot more freedom.
100%. And like I said, I'm from Sheppey. I have a real oppositional streak myself, and I don't believe that that is in the best interests of our children, so I'm not going to do it.
Perfect. I think the oppositional streak can be very beneficial.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. We have talked an awful lot today. I almost wish that we'd split it between 2 podcasts, a part 1 and a part 2, because then we could have explored it a bit more, but maybe we'll have a chat about that after
No problem.
After the podcast. Before you go, could you tell our listeners how they can access your services if they need them?
Okay, so I've got a website, Inside Out OSYP. There's a contact form on there. The services for the schools are generally just delivered through the schools, but I'm always happy for people to email me so I can signpost them in the right direction. There is a Tam's Journey page on there with the links to the different ways of buying the books if you want to just have the conversation at home. And I have a couple of Facebook pages. So Inside Out has got its own Facebook page, so has Tam's Journey, and myself as a practitioner have only a Facebook page, which is just Amanda Peddle, and anybody can add themselves on that. That's a professional page for, you know, if anybody wants to reach out. And 9 times out of 10, it's not me that needs to do the work. They just need to be pointed in the right direction, or made.
But you're happy to do that,
because actually, you know, the support is there. And that's why on my YouTube channel we've got these little clips. We've got explainer clips. What's a youth worker, what's a play therapist, what's a counsellor, to start to try and demystify some of the roles that you might come across when you've got a child. So we're sort of adding to that as we go along. So it might be worth looking on there and just listening to what these roles are first before you sort of think, well, what is it that I need? And we're going to be growing that, and you know, getting lots and lots of things on there to give people ideas of what their next steps can be.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me. It's been lovely to talk to you.
No problems. And thank you for everyone for listening. And remember that this is the Simply Sheppy podcast. It's all about you. And if you would like to be a guest, have any ideas or feedback, please get in touch on our Facebook page at Simply Sheppy and let us know. Thank you.